Hey there everyone, welcome back to Veggin Gardening with me, Kate, where we talk about Zone B gardening from week to week. It is January 16th, 2022, and we're going to talk more about planting for a 3-season garden today. The first step is to know which seasons do you want to grow in. Have you only ever grown in the summer and you want to try extending it to the fall, or do you want to jumpstart the season with a spring garden? For me, I did pretty well with a spring garden last year, but completely failed at a fall garden, so fall is definitely going to be my focus this year. If you are thinking about extending your season before or after frost, then you'll have to think about frost protection, whether it's a frost cloth or plastic or row covers, but start to think about those. Secondly, you want to make sure that you know which seasons your plants will actually grow in. You want to know what kind of weather your crops prefer and how long they grow for. So you don't want to start lettuce in the middle of July because it's too hot and they'll struggle and not taste as good. Or you don't want to start your tomatoes really late in June because it might not have as much time to produce that much food. So just make sure you review those parameters. Last week we talked about knowing where things will be planted within your garden. Now you have to start thinking about when those things will be planted. For every specific spot in your garden, you should, in a 3-season garden, be able to get up anywhere from 2 to 5 crops in that single space. And you can do this for any kind of garden. If it's flowers, vegetables, herbs, you can have multiple crops in the same relative space for many gardens. Your goal is to get as much out of the space as possible and to be able to enjoy every available moment of gardening. So you don't want it to be a gorgeous spring day and not have anything growing. You really want to take advantage of that time. So let's go over some examples. In one spot, you can start with onions because they do really well as soon as you can work the soil. They do fine in the beginning season where it's cold and rainy. Once you harvest those, you can plant beans or kohlrabi. Once that's done, you probably have enough time in that same spot to grow a crop of lettuce or spinach or some other short-lived cold crop. Another example would be starting off with lettuce, then beans, then beets, then pak choi. Even if you have a container garden, you can still plant for early spring in your container and then replace the soil for your summer crop. Your soil will probably have to be replaced again for your fall crop. The trick to having a 3-season garden, for me, is staying on top of seeding and planting, because in the middle of summer everyone is really busy, so it's hard to take care of your garden but then go back inside and keep seeding. Or it can be really hard to pull a plant out even though it's doing just fine. Maybe it's not producing that much, but you have to get that next crop in. So those are 2 things that I certainly need to work on this year. Now, if you want to take your 3-season garden to the next level, here are some things that you want to consider. You want to combine 3 main concepts. First is 3-season gardening. What do you want to plant and when? Second, for each space you have, you want to make sure that you're incorporating crop rotation. There are the 4 main groups of crop rotation, that every farmer uses. You might not be able to get all 4 sections in your one space throughout the whole growing season, but you certainly want to switch it up as you're growing. And third, like we talked about last week, is intercropping. This is the concept. Putting all 3 of these concepts together is what fascinates me about my garden, and it's certainly what helps me get through the winter. For intercropping, In a 3-season garden, you want to consider what cluster of plants can grow well together throughout the whole growing season. You might not have a cluster that just grows in the spring, just in the summer, or just in the fall. There's going to be overlap in between all the seasons. So the first example that I used was I started off with lettuce, and I had row covers, so I was able to get started in early March. Then as the threat of frost was gone, or it would get warm enough under the row covers during the day, even if it got a little frosted at night, I planted my small tomato seedlings, and in between all of that, I planted bush beans. So as the summer progressed, the lettuce started to bolt, and so I harvested the rest of that, got rid of that. Meanwhile, the green beans are growing larger, they're taking up the space that the lettuce was in, and my indeterminate tomatoes were growing up a trellis. No one's competing for space. They're all moving and shifting and growing together. Once the green beans were done, the tomatoes had grown large enough to provide a little bit of shade on the soil. So the next thing I planted was kohlrabi. Kohlrabi is a brassica. It doesn't do that well with a lot of heat, so it really appreciated having a little bit of shade from the tall tomatoes. Then once we had the first frost in the fall, I was able to take down the tomato, harvest the rest of the tomatoes, take them down, put row covers back on, and the kohlrabi just flourished. It enjoyed the cool evenings, kind of warm days, and I got a great crop out of those. And just think, that is one space out of my garden, and I got 4 awesome crops out of it. So this is really what entertains me during the winter. I sit and I figure out all these different combinations, what works well in each spot, what did I grow last year so that I avoid growing it in that spot this year. I have a spreadsheet for it, which I'm more than happy to share. And I'm really looking forward to making a few graphics to help explain this concept a little more. But just to summarize, planting for a 3-season garden, what seasons are you going to try and plant in? What, if any, equipment do you need to plant in those bookend seasons or before and after frost? Not only knowing where things will be planted, but when, so that you can get a few crops in each space. And then taking it a next level and combining crop rotation and intercropping. It's a lot to think about, but it's fascinating how much you can get out of your garden, any kind of garden, thinking about these 3 things and making them work together. Next week, we'll probably just wrap up the planning portion of your garden with making sure that you've got all the small equipment, you know where you're getting it from, so that you are ready to start seeding. Thanks again for watching Veggin' Out Gardening with me, Kate. I'll see you next week. Have a good week, everyone. Thank you. Bye.